Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start my Oktoberfest horror stories for the month of October. Hopefully, there will be at least one or two every day leading up to the end of the month. So, here we go. Of all species of ghostly phenomena, the commonly known as haunted houses appeals most to the ordinary person. There is something very eerie in being shut up within four walls of a house with a ghost. The poor human being is placed at such a disadvantage if we know that a gateway or a road or field has a reputation of being haunted. We can, in nearly every case, make a detour and so to avoid the unpleasant locality. But the presence of a ghost in a house creates a very different state of affairs. It appears and disappears at its own sweet will, with a total disregard of our feelings. It seems to be as much part of a parcel of the domicile as the staircase or the hall door, and consequently nothing short of leaving the house or of pulling it down. Both of these both of these solutions are not always practicable. Will free, but it will free us absolutely from the unwelcome presence. There is also something so natural and at the same time so unnatural in seeing a door open when we know that no human hand rests on the knob, or in hearing the sound of footsteps, light or heavy, and feeling that we cannot be attributed to the feet of mortal man or woman. Or perhaps a form appears in a room, standing, sitting, or walking. In fact, situated in its three dimensions, apparently as an ordinary being of flesh and blood, until it proves its unearthly nature by vanishing before our astonished eyes. Or perhaps we are asleep in bed. The room is shrouded in darkness, and our recumbent attitude, together with the weight of bedclothes, hampers our movements and probably takes us more cowardly, or probably makes us more cowardly, sorry. A man will meet pain or danger boldly if he is standing upright, occupying that erect position which is his last, which is his as Lord of creation, but his courage does not well go high if he be surprised. We are awakened suddenly by the feel that some superhuman presence is in the room. We are transfixed with terror. We cannot find either the bell, rope, or the matches, while we dare not leap out of bed and make a rush for the door lest we should encounter we know not what. In an agony of fear, we feel it moving towards us. It approaches closer and yet closer to the bed. And for what may or may not then happen, we must refer our readers to the pages of this book. But the skeptical reader will say, this is all very well, but there are no haunted houses. All these alleged strange happenings are due to a vivid imagination or else to rats and mice. The question of deliberate and conscious fraud may be rejected in almost every instance. This simple solution has been put forward so often that it should infallibly have solved the problem long ago. But will such a reader explain how that it is the noise made by rats and mice can resemble slow, heavy footsteps, or else take the form of a human being, seen by several persons, or how our imagination can cause doors to open and shut, or else create a conglomeration of noises which physically would be beyond the power of the ordinary individuals to reproduce. Whatever may be the ultimate explanation, we feel that there is a great deal in words quoted by Professor Barrett. In spite of all reasonable skepticism, it is difficult to avoid the accepting, at least provisionally, in the conclusion that there are, in a certain sense, haunted houses, i.e., that there are houses in which similar quasi-human apparitions have occurred at different times in different inhabitants, under circumstances which exclude the hypothesis of suggestion or expectation. We must now turn to the subject of this chapter. Mrs. G. Kelly, a lady well known in musical circles in Dublin, sends as her own personal experience of the following tale of a most quiet haunting in which the spectral chairwoman does not seem to have entirely laid aside all her mundane habits. My first encounter with a ghost occurred about 20 years ago. On that occasion, I was standing in the kitchen of my house in Square when a woman, whom I was afterwards to see many times, walked down the stairs into the room. Having heard the footsteps outside, I was not in the least perturbed, but turned who to see who it was, and found myself looking at a tall, stout, elderly woman wearing a bonnet and an old-fashioned mantle. She had grey hair and a benign, amiable expression. We stood gazing at each other while one could count to 20. At first, I was not at all frightened, but gradually, as I stood looking at her, an uncomfortable feeling increasing to terror came over me. Thus caused me to retreat further and further back, until I had my back against the wall, and then the apparition slowly faded. This feeling of terror, due perhaps to the unexpectedness of her appearance, always overcame me on the subsequent occasions on which I and when I saw her. These occasions numbered 12 or 15. I have seen her in every room in the house and at every hour of the day, during a period of about 10 years. The last time she appeared was 10 years ago. My husband and I had just returned from a concert at which he had been singing, and we sat for some time over supper, talking about the events of the evening. When at last I rose to leave the room and opened the dining room door, I found my old lady standing on the mat outside with her head bent towards the door in the attitude of listening. I called out loudly, and then my husband rushed to my side. That was the last time I have seen her. One peculiarity of the spectral visitant was a strong objection to disorder or untidiness of any kind, or even an alteration in the general routine of the house. For instance, she showed up her disapproval of any stranger coming to sleep by turning the chairs face downwards on the floor in the room they were to occupy. I well remember one of our guests having not gone to his room one evening for something he had forgotten, remarking on coming downstairs again, "Well, you people have an extremely extraordinary manner of arranging your furniture. I have nearly broken my bones over one of the bedroom chairs, which was turned upside down on the floor. As my husband and I had restored that chair twice already that day to its proper position, we were not much surprised at his remarks, although we did not enlighten him. The whole family have been disturbed by a peculiar knocking which occurred in the various rooms in the house, frequently on the door or a wall, but sometimes on the furniture, quite close to where we had been sitting. This was evidently loud enough to be heard in the next house, or our next door neighbour once asked my husband why he selected such curious hours for hanging his pictures. Another strange and fairly frequent occurrence was the following, and I had got a set of skunk furs which I fancied and but it had unpleasant odour, as this fur sometimes has. And that night I used to take it from my wardrobe and lay it on a chair in the drawing room, which was next to my bedroom. The first time I did this, on going to the drawing room, I found, to my surprise, my muff in one corner and my stole in another. Not for a moment suspecting a supernatural agent, I asked my servant about it, and she assured me that she had not been in the room that morning. Whereupon I determined to test the matter, which I did by putting in the furs late at night and taking care that I was the first to enter the room the next morning. I invariably found that they had been disturbed. The following strange and pathetic incident occurred in a well-known square in the north side of the city. In or about 100 years ago, a young officer was ordered to Dublin and took a house there for himself and his family. He sent his wife and 2 children, intending to join them in the course of a few days. When the latter and the nurse arrived, they found only an old charwoman in the house, and she left shortly after their arrival. Finding that something was needed, the nurse went out to purchase it. On her return, she asked the mother were the children all right, as she had seen 2 ghostly forms flit past her on the doorstep. The mother answered that she believed they were, but on going up to the nursery, they found both of the children with their throats cut. The murderer had never been brought to justice, and no motive was ever discovered for the crime. The unfortunate mother went mad, and it is said that an eerie feeling still clings to the house, while 2 little heads are sometimes seen at the window of the room where the deed was committed. A most weird experience fell to the lot of Major McGregor and was attributed by him to Real Ghost Stories, this celebrated Christmas number of the reviews. He says, in the end of 1871, I went over to Ireland to visit a relative living in a square in the north side of Dublin. In January 1872, the husband of my relative fell ill. I sat up with him for several nights, and at last he seemed better. I went to bed and directed the footman to call me if anything went wrong. I soon fell asleep, but sometimes after I was awakened by a push on the left shoulder. I startled up and said, "Is there anything wrong?" I got no answer, but immediately received another push. I got annoyed and said, "Can you not speak, man, and tell me if there is anything wrong?" Still no answer, and I had a feeling I was going to get another push, when I suddenly turned around and caught the human hand, warm, plump, and soft. I said, "Who are you?" But I got no answer. I then tried to pull the person towards me, but could not do so, and then said, "I will know who you are." And having the hand tight in my right hand, with my left I felt the wrist and the arm enclosed, as it seemed to me, in a tight-fitting sleeve of some winter material with a linen cuff. But then I got to the elbow. All trace of the arm ceased. I was so astounded I let the hand go. And just then the clock struck 2, including the mistress of the house. There were 5 females in the establishment, and I can assert that the hand belonged to none of them. When I reported the adventure to the servants, they exclaimed, "Oh, sure it must have been the master's old Aunt Betty, who lived here for many years in the upper part of that house." And she died over 50 years ago at a great age. I afterwards heard that the room in which I felt the hand had been considered haunted, and very curious noises and peculiar incidents occurred, such as the bed clothes torn off, and one lady got a slap in the face from some invisible hand, and when she lit her candle, she saw as if something opaque fell or jumped off the bed. A general officer, a brother of the lady, slept there 2 nights but preferred going to a hotel to remaining the third night. He never would say what he heard or saw, but always said the room was uncanny. I slept for months in the room afterwards and was never in the least bit disturbed. And that's tonight's stories, ladies and gentlemen. And I will be carrying on tomorrow night with some more stories from True Ghost Stories. And this one in particular is for around Dublin. I hope you have enjoyed this and look forward to the rest of the month and a few little scary bumps and jumps. And I will enjoy telling you and relaying them to you. Bye for now, and I shall talk to you tomorrow night.